Ladies and gentlemen, now let me ask y'all something. Have you ever seen somebody doing real good, like real good, and all of a sudden, boom, they get blocked, banned, shut down? Mom, you know what I'm talking about. See, it's like this. Success don't come without resistance. And today, we're going to talk about one of the boldest, wildest examples of this happening in the real world. Why the United States keeps banning Indian companies. Yeah, I said it. Success always attracts scrutiny. The moment an individual, a brand, or a nation begins to rise, especially from unexpected quarters, it invites attention. Not all of it's supportive. When a company from a developing nation like India starts making waves on the global stage, offering innovation, cost effectiveness, and scalability, the traditional powerhouses begin to pay attention. But this attention isn't always applause. More often, it's a microscope, a spotlight, a magnifying glass searching for flaws. Because success, real, tangible, undeniable success, disrupts the narrative. It forces people to reevaluate what they thought they knew about who leads and who follows, who innovates and who imitates. Indian companies, especially in tech, software, pharmaceuticals, and manufacturing, have become increasingly competitive on the global scale. These companies are no longer just outsourcing partners or back office operators. They're launching platforms, creating technology, building solutions that challenge the dominance of long established Western firms. And that's when the scrutiny begins. It's not enough that they're succeeding. They have to be dissected, audited, questioned. Their intentions are doubted. Their operations are put under the scanner. And their motives are debated at political levels. Because when someone who wasn't supposed to be a contender starts winning, the rules of the game suddenly start shifting. What most people don't understand is that scrutiny isn't always about finding truth. It's often about protecting turf. When an Indian app suddenly gains hundreds of millions of users globally, it's no longer just a tech product. It becomes a potential threat to existing tech giants who have held monopolies for decades. Now the narrative shifts. Instead of innovation, there are concerns about data. Instead of applauding the rise, there are accusations of unfair practices. That success now becomes a reason to block, ban, and investigate. The goal isn't always justice. It's sometimes preservation. The system has always been comfortable with success coming from familiar places. The discomfort begins when success starts coming from where it wasn't expected. Scrutiny comes dressed in many forms: media campaigns, legal challenges, regulatory blocks, geopolitical narratives. And for Indian companies, this means constantly walking a tightrope. They have to be excellent, ethical, efficient, and even then they must brace for unexpected barriers. Because the moment they begin to rise, they are no longer just businesses. They are symbols of shifting power. They represent a new voice in the global conversation. And that's not always welcome with open arms. For decades, the narrative has been centered around a few dominant nations. The emergence of Indian companies challenges this pattern. It forces the world to look east and acknowledge competence that rivals the West. Behind every ban or sanction is often an untold story, not just about policies or regulations, but about discomfort. The discomfort of watching someone once seen as a service provider now standing as a global competitor. The scrutiny isn't always based on actual wrongdoing. Sometimes it's based on projected threat. What this company might become, what market share it could take, what influence it might wield. And that imagined future is enough to justify intense present-day scrutiny. It's not just about what an Indian company has done. It's about what it is now capable of doing. Scrutiny in this context becomes a tool, not of truth, but of control. A way to slow the momentum, shift public opinion, and protect established interests. And yet the rise continues because the success of these companies is not built on shortcuts. It's built on skill, determination, and a deep understanding of both global and local needs. The scrutiny might slow them, but it rarely stops them. And every time one company breaks through, it clears a path for others behind it. Dominance threatens the status quo. When a company or country begins to dominate in a field traditionally controlled by others, it doesn't just raise eyebrows, it shakes the foundation of long-standing systems. The global business arena is not just a marketplace, it's a power structure. And power structures don't like disruption. They're built on consistency, predictability, and control. So when Indian companies start taking up space once reserved for Western giants, when they don't just compete, but begin to lead, it challenges more than just market positions. It challenges the very order of who is supposed to lead and who is supposed to follow. For decades, the US and other Western nations have set the tone in technology, pharmaceuticals, telecom, and finance. They've built the systems, written the rules, and led the innovation. But now Indian companies are showing up with new ideas, fresh energy, and an ability to deliver at a scale and speed that's hard to match. They're not just catching up, they're setting trends. And when that happens, those who have historically dominated feel that grip loosen. That shift in influence can feel threatening because it forces them to compete in ways they haven't had to before. When an Indian IT firm starts taking over major global contracts, it means a Western firm might lose a deal it used to consider guaranteed. When an Indian pharma company offers the same medicine at 1/10 the price, it means a global giant has to either drop prices or lose market share. When an Indian app captures millions of users, it pulls attention and revenue away from established platforms. Dominance isn't just about being good, it's about changing the default. And the default for a long time has not included India at the top. This is where resistance kicks in. The status quo doesn't go quietly. It pushes back, sometimes with policies, sometimes with pressure, sometimes with narrative. Suddenly there are trade restrictions, new compliance standards, or concerns about national security. The goal isn't always fairness. Sometimes it's simply about making the game harder for the new leader, just long enough for the old leader to catch up. Dominance isn't appreciated when it comes from the wrong direction. And for many in the global hierarchy, an Indian company dominating feels like a misalignment in their mental map of the world. That discomfort translates into action. Regulations start targeting the rising players. Public discourse shifts focus from their innovation to their potential risk. Governments start taking steps not just to regulate, but to restrict. Not because these companies have broken the rules, but because their very success is rewriting them. Dominance by nature redefines the game. It resets expectations. And that's threatening to those who have benefited from the old rules for generations. The fear isn't just about what Indian companies are doing today. It's about what they might do tomorrow. It's about the growing realization that leadership in key sectors might be shifting. It's the acknowledgement that this isn't a one-time win, but the beginning of a new pattern. And that pattern suggests a future where the traditional powers no longer hold exclusive control. That future creates uncertainty for those used to being at the top. So to protect their place, they push back against the new dominant forces, not with innovation, but with barriers. The success of Indian companies isn't accidental. It's the result of years of effort, education, investment, and ambition. But the moment that success threatens to become dominance, it enters a different league. It becomes political. It becomes strategic. It becomes something to be managed, attempt, not celebrated. Because dominance isn't just winning, it's changing the winner's circle. And for those who've sat there comfortably for too long, that change is hard to accept. Innovation from the unexpected is what truly disrupts the world. For the longest time, global innovation has been associated with a select few regions, Silicon Valley, Western Europe, and a handful of high-tech hubs in the developed world. These places have owned the narrative not just of creation, but of who gets to be called a visionary, who gets funded, who gets believed. So when innovation starts emerging from places like India, places that were once seen only as labor markets or service providers, it doesn't just surprise people. It unsettles them. It turns the global expectation on its head. India has always had the talent. What changed over the years is the infrastructure, the access to technology, the investment in education, and a growing hunger among young entrepreneurs to not just work for global companies, but to build their own. This has led to a surge of innovation across industries, fintech, edtech, health tech, AI, and even space exploration. What once seemed improbable, a space mission launched at a fraction of NASA's cost, is now reality. What once seemed unlikely, an Indian-made platform competing with global social media giants, is now happening. These ideas, products, and systems are no longer imitations. They are bold, original, and often more efficient and scalable than their Western counterparts. But when innovation comes from where it wasn't expected, it triggers defensiveness in the global market because it shatters the image of who is supposed to lead and who is supposed to follow. If an Indian startup can build a payment infrastructure used by hundreds of millions with seamless efficiency, what does that say about the high cost, less inclusive systems elsewhere? If Indian engineers and thinkers are creating AI tools that solve real-world problems in agriculture, language translation, or healthcare, it forces the world to question why similar innovations haven't emerged from places with far more resources. This discomfort translates into skepticism. Instead of celebrating these achievements, questions are raised. Are they secure? Are they ethical? Are they compliant with international norms? The innovations are met not with support, but suspicion. And that suspicion isn't always born out of evidence. It often stems from the simple fact that the innovation came from an unexpected place. There's a narrative bias deeply rooted in the global psyche. If something exceptional comes from a place that wasn't historically associated with cutting-edge creation, people start to look for what's wrong with it instead of what's right. Indian companies have to fight not just for market share, but for recognition. Their ideas must not only work, they must overperform just to be taken seriously. And even when they do, they're often subjected to an extra layer of scrutiny that others are not. Their motives are questioned, their partnerships are examined, and their growth is seen through the lens of geopolitical strategy rather than entrepreneurial spirit. The innovation itself becomes politicized, not because of what it does, but because of where it came from. The global playing field, though marketed as open and fair, often carries hidden fences. And those fences get higher when someone jumps too far too fast. Indian companies that innovate are, in many cases, not just building for India, they're building for the world. They're solving global problems with frugal, scalable, user-centered design. And that makes them powerful. It makes them hard to ignore. And for some, that makes them dangerous. Because when innovation no longer depends on a certain geography or economy, it democratizes opportunity. And democratized opportunity threatens those who have built their empires on exclusivity. So the reaction isn't always applause. Sometimes it's restriction. Sometimes it's fear disguised as caution. Because innovation from the unexpected means the old world has to adapt, reevaluate, and most painfully, compete with those they never considered rivals. That shift in dynamic is where resistance begins. Economic moves disguised as security fears are one of the most strategic tools used in modern geopolitics. In today's interconnected world, every trade deal, ban, or policy shift is rarely just about what's on the surface. Governments often use the language of national security to justify actions that are at their core. Economic protectionism. When Indian companies begin to grow internationally, gain market traction, or threaten to outpace Western counterparts, the reactions are often framed not in terms of competition, but in terms of safety, sovereignty, and national interests. The narrative becomes one of caution, not commerce, but the underlying motive is to protect economic dominance. This tactic allows decision makers to take action without appearing biased or anti-competitive. Instead of admitting that an Indian app, platform, or product is beating others fair and square, the justification becomes rooted in ambiguous concerns, data privacy, potential influence, hypothetical threats. This shift in reasoning makes it hard to argue against. After all, who wants to be seen opposing national security? It becomes a convenient, unquestionable shield behind which economic interests are protected. It reframes the conversation entirely, taking the focus away from innovation and success and shifting it towards suspicion and fear. Take the tech industry, for example. When an Indian company creates a digital ecosystem that rivals global giants in functionality and user adoption, questions begin to surface about how it handles user data. Is it safe? Is it open to influence from the Indian government? Are there possible channels of misuse? These are valid questions, but the timing and tone often reveal more than the questions themselves. Because the same level of scrutiny isn't always applied to Western companies that may have had actual data breaches or privacy scandals. The difference lies not in risk, but in origin. The fear is manufactured to slow down competition and protect existing economic strongholds. Similarly, in pharmaceuticals or defense tech, Indian advancements are met with non-tariff barriers and regulations that weren't enforced before. Suddenly, the spotlight turns to compliance with outdated standards or the need for further review on security-related concerns. These delays and barriers aren't always about safety, they're about strategy. They buy time for competitors, maintain the balance of trade in favor of the West, and send a message that rising too fast will come with consequences. In other words, it's not about whether the product works or not, it's about who made it, how quickly they're rising, and what they're disrupting in the process. These disguised economic defenses serve a dual purpose. First, they protect internal industries from being outperformed. Second, they shape public opinion. By labeling foreign success as a potential threat, governments can justify actions that might otherwise be seen as anti-free market. It's easier to ban a product if the public believes it poses a danger. It's easier to limit competition if consumers are convinced that their data, their privacy, or their safety is at risk. This fear-based framing turns economic moves into matters of security and moral duty. For Indian companies, this creates an uphill battle. They must not only innovate, but also defend their integrity on a global scale. They must navigate a marketplace where the rules change depending on their success. The more they grow, the more likely they are to face resistance that has little to do with business and everything to do with politics. And the most frustrating part is that the conversations surrounding them are often based on what ifs instead of what is. Hypothetical threats are treated as concrete dangers, while actual performance, reliability, and innovation are pushed to the background. These security concerns aren't always rooted in fact, they're often strategic narratives. By turning a competitor into a potential enemy, existing powers maintain their advantage without ever admitting vulnerability. They don't have to compete on merit. They can simply shift the conversation to one of defense. And in doing so, they maintain the status quo under the illusion of caution and protection. Fear of losing control is a powerful driver behind many of the decisions that shape global trade, diplomacy, and business. For decades, the economic and technological leadership of the world has been concentrated in the hands of a few powerful nations, with the United States being at the forefront. This dominance has allowed not just economic control, but also the ability to influence global standards, dictate terms of engagement, and shape the digital, financial, and industrial ecosystems that the rest of the world must operate within. But when companies from countries like India begin to challenge this hierarchy, not with brute force, but with innovation, intelligence, and relentless ambition, it creates an unease that is deeper than just market competition. It's the kind of unease that comes from realizing that the script might be changing. For a long time, Indian companies were seen as support systems, places to outsource, to save costs, to supplement global operations. But now, those same companies are writing their own codes, building their own platforms, and creating technologies that don't just compete, but often surpass what's available in traditional markets. That shift creates an underlying fear. What happens if control slips? What happens if someone else gets to set the rules? Control in this context means far more than market share. It means influence over how systems are built, who gets access to critical data, who shapes the user experience, and who holds the levers of infrastructure. It means deciding which standards are adopted globally, which companies get licensed, which currencies dominate digital payments, and which platforms become indispensable. Indian companies are beginning to assert themselves in all these spaces, offering alternatives to American tech, creating regional solutions with global scalability, and proving that innovation doesn't need to be Western to be world-class. This rising autonomy from India, especially through its private sector, makes it harder for global powers to maintain the level of influence they've historically enjoyed. When Indian software firms, app developers, defense contractors, and pharmaceutical manufacturers start gaining credibility and clients around the globe, it directly impacts how decisions are made at the international level. And every new success story is a reminder that the center of gravity may be shifting, not all at once, but steadily. That's when fear sets in, not always expressed, but often acted upon. Policies begin to reflect this discomfort. Bans, regulations, trade restrictions, and data localization laws become tools to try to slow the momentum. These decisions are often framed around other concerns, but beneath it all lies the core issue. Control is being questioned, and that scares those who have held it for so long. There's a loss of predictability, a realization that no matter how well structured the current systems are, new players are no longer waiting for invitations. They are building their own tables. The United States, like any global power, has an interest in maintaining its strategic position. But when that position is challenged in fields where it once held unshakable dominance, the reflex is often defensive. This fear is not just about economics, it's about perception. If Indian companies can lead and do it successfully, it changes how emerging nations see themselves. It inspires other countries to back their own innovation. It sparks investment outside the traditional hubs. It fragments the monopoly of power and redistributes influence across more players. This redistribution is not necessarily chaotic or confrontational, but it does reduce centralized control. And for those used to controlling markets, narratives, technologies, and even mindsets, that reduction feels like a threat. Indian companies, especially in tech and digital services, are proving that excellence can emerge from any geography. They are proving that leadership is no longer exclusive. And when leadership is no longer exclusive, control becomes a shared asset, not a single entity's tool. That change is what triggers fear, not just of being outperformed, but of being redefined.